Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Congressman Fitzpatrick, for your bipartisan work to finally make the 911 Saves Act a reality for our 911 dispatchers. I also like to thank Congresswoman Shalala and Congressman Khanna and Commissioner Rosen Warsell and our partners from APCO International. The Massachusetts Communications Supervisor Association, who travel all the way from the Bay State to be with us today, and Lindsay Washington, an EMT and a member of AFSCME and EMS Workers United. And last but certainly not least, the National Emergency Number Association. This is a big day for the 100,000 public safety telecommunicators, one that I have been working on for a quite long time. Before I was elected to Congress, I was a 911 dispatcher for 17 and a half years. I know firsthand the challenges our public safety dispatchers face, the stress that they are put under, and the importance of their work. Unfortunately, the Office of Management and Budget considers dispatchers clerical workers. Imagine that, clerical workers. 911 dispatchers are stuck in call centers, typically dark and cold rooms. In my case, I spent most of my career as a 911 dispatcher 4 floors below ground and controlling things from behind the scenes. Unlike clerical workers, 911 dispatchers cannot simply walk away from their position for a bathroom break. We call them quickies. On any given day, we'll listen to violent crimes in progress, like I did when I got a call from a little girl who ended up being murdered at the hands of her uncle. She waited 20 minutes for me to answer that call. Or we might speak to a caller on the brink of suicide. Now, let me tell you a little bit about suicide calls, because there are 2 types of suicide calls. One is they just want to end life. So they dial 911, you hear a gunshot, and that's it. They want to notify someone so other than their family member comes to pick up the body. And there's the other 911 call, my favorite. The one they really want you to talk them out of it. So they're calling for help. So the decisions that 911 dispatchers make, life-saving decisions, in just a few seconds are certainly worthy of considering them first responders. In August, I joined with Commissioner Rosen Warsell to visit the LAPD Metro's Communications Dispatch Center, where I once worked, the new center that actually has windows. We spoke with the 911 professionals who spend every day working on 911 calls. They're the first line of defense when crime happens. You'd be hard-pressed to find administrative staff who are required to undergo the amount of training and evaluation that is required of public safety dispatchers. This is a specialized occupation that requires professionals to think critically and use extensive skills and training to help our first responders save lives and keep our communities safe. Not changing this classification impacts the benefits and resources that are available for the personnel and the communities that are responsible for answering 911 calls. And I ask you, wouldn't you want the person who is answering your call for help during the most vulnerable time in your life, because you're not having a great day if you're calling 911, to have the best possible training that they could have? That is why we're gathered here today, to reclassify these jobs as protective service occupations. The 911 Saves Act directs OMB to recognize the life-saving work dispatchers do each and every day and ensure that all classification standards place public safety first. With dispatcher shortages across the country and it becoming harder to recruit new workers, it is time for Washington to give 911 dispatchers their respect and due and classify them along with public safety peers as protective service professionals that they are. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Congressman Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania's 1st Congressional District.
Thank you, Congresswoman Torres. And I can tell you, having been in federal law enforcement for 14 years as an FBI agent, we worked hand in hand with our 9/11 dispatchers every day. Heroes like Congresswoman Torres and the work she did. And I can tell you, they're all first responders, every single one of them, and they deserve the same protection. And when we are in danger, as Congresswoman Torres had indicated, we call 911 and we rely on those on the other end of the line to make sure that we get the help we need. Many times, 911 operators provide medical advice, guiding the caller to perform potentially life-saving actions, providing emergency medical instructions, speaking with people who are considering suicide, and ensuring first responders have as much information as possible as they respond to the scene. The Office of Management and Budget incorrectly classified public safety telecommunicators last year, saying that they didn't administer care and simply talk people through procedures or provide advice. OMB also said public safety telecommunicators are separate from first responders located in separate areas. This is simply not the case. That advice that they refer to and talking through procedures save lives. And as APCO in their survey showed, 78% of public safety telecommunicators were asked to operate in the field to assist with communications on scene. It's clear that public safety telecommunicators, 911 dispatchers, and the like should be classified as protective service occupations. By reclassifying 911 operators and dispatchers as protective service occupations, we can give over 100,000 people who perform this critical work the recognition they deserve. I want to congratulate Congresswoman Torres on all the work she and heart that she put into this, having done this work before, for Congresswoman Shalala and for Congressman Rokana for being here today. And next up is Congresswoman Shalala.
Thank you very much, Congressman Fitzpatrick. So what am I doing here? I'm a freshman. Well, Christmas time, before I was sworn in, I come from a big Lebanese family, and we were having dinner, and I was sitting next to my cousin. She's a dispatcher in Cleveland, Ohio. And she said to me, "Do you know Representative Torres?" And I said, "Yes, I've known her for many years." And she explained to me about dispatchers not being identified correctly by the OMB, and she said, "Can you do something about it?" So I got on the Rules Committee, and Congresswoman Torres will tell you that I walked right up to her and said, "Hey, can we do something about the dispatchers?" I think she was a little shocked that I knew something about the subject. I checked with my constituents in Florida, and they were very enthusiastic. This bill is about saving lives. And in particular, what we haven't talked about is the high turnover of dispatchers. By identify them as first responders, we give them not simply job security, but the recognition of what their job really is. And anything we can do to support these real heroes of our emergency system in this country, I'm very enthusiastic about. And so I'm happy to join with my colleagues to support this effort, but more importantly, to recognize the dispatchers and the really life-saving work that they do in our communities. In Miami, they're absolutely critical to our life-saving system and our emergency system both in police and fire, and in the case of my own hometown, in the Sheriff's Department as well. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be supportive, and I thank Representative Torres, Representative Fitzpatrick, and Representative Khanna for letting me join them, a mere freshman, to support this effort. And let me introduce the FEC Commissioner, who is going to say a few. Oh, who's that?
We're going to go Ro Khanna.
Oh, Ro Khanna, one of our congressional leaders. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Representative Shalala. I think Representative Shalala is being a bit falsely modest. She's had a huge impact in her freshman year on this, and that's partly because, as all of you know, she was a former cabinet secretary, and she's brought that experience to Congress. I want to be brief, but I want to just focus my remarks on recognizing the leadership of Norma Torres and Brian Fitzpatrick, and how this is an example of Congress actually being functional. Norma Torres is the only person in Congress who has actually been a 911 operator. It shows the value of having people with diverse backgrounds who draw on their life experience to fix problems and improve the lives of people. So I know she's been so persistent on this, and I admire her for bringing this now to Congress and hopefully to the floor for a vote. And Brian Fitzpatrick shows that you can actually work across the aisle, and we don't have to be polarized. And when there's something that's common sense, good legislation, we can come together and get things done. So my colleagues have talked about why this is so important for dispatchers, but I think this legislation also shows that Congress, when we want, can be functional and get things done to improve people's lives. I now want to introduce the Federal Communication Commissioner, Jessica Rosenworcel. We're honored to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Representatives Torres, Fitzpatrick, and Shalala and Khanna. This is so sweet to have this bill and to do this today. You see, I serve as a commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission, and in that role, I've visited dozens of our nation's 911 call centers, from Alabama to Alaska, Virginia to Vermont, and many more places in between, including where Congresswoman Torres served for many years in Los Angeles, and that was a treat. And all of these centers are different. Some are these vast spaces with lots of screens, some are small and darkly lit, but they all have one thing in common. They've got 911 operators who work there who amaze. People call 911 on the worst day of their lives. And as crises mount, those 911 operators answer every call with steely calm and then help ensure that help is on the way. You see, these operators are among our most essential first responders, because before a whistle on a fire station blows, an ambulance races, or an air horn blares, it's a 911 professional who takes in the call and sets emergency response in motion. And their job is complex. It is anything but clerical, and they deserve to be classified, like their public safety peers, as protective service professionals. Calling them anything else overlooks the life-saving efforts and assistance they provide in conjunction with police, fire, and emergency medical personnel. So this bipartisan effort is good stuff. I am thrilled to be here today to support it, and it's the right thing to do to ask the Office of Management and Budget to revisit this issue and reclassify our nation's 911 operators as public service professionals. So now I'd like to introduce Derek Porch, who is the Executive Director and CEO of APCO.
Good afternoon. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials International. I represent the world's oldest and largest public safety communications association, and I want to express my sincere appreciation on behalf of our more than 30,000 members, public safety telecommunicators, supervisors, and directors working in emergency communication centers throughout the United States. recognizing the protective nature of the work performed by public safety telecommunicators is incredibly important and much deserved for these dedicated professionals. Before I joined APCO, I was a police chief in North Carolina and later served as the first chief of the Federal Communications Commission's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. But before all that, I was a 911 dispatcher. That was my first job in public safety. Over the course of my 40+ years in this field, I've witnessed firsthand the life-saving work, skill, and dedication of our nation's public safety telecommunicators. Somewhere in the United States today, public safety telecommunicators have saved lives. With more than 100,000 of these professional public servants in the United States, not a day goes by that lives aren't saved. When someone calls 911 or a police officer radios dispatch for an officer down, a well-trained, dedicated public safety telecommunicator takes actions that can make the difference between life and death. They're coaching someone through CPR, picking up on a threat to police officers and firefighters in the field, or convincing someone who's suicidal to accept help. Again, this happens every day. The work performed by these professionals is nothing short of extraordinary, and it's 100% protective. Appropriately classifying public safety telecommunicators is important, and it's the right thing to do. To Representative Torres, Representative Fitzpatrick, Representative Shalala, and Representative Khanna, and the other distinguished guests here today, I want to thank you and your other co-sponsors, including my own Congressman Mark Meadows from North Carolina, for your leadership and for seeking to ensure that America's 100,000 public safety telecommunicators receive the respect and recognition they so deserve. Passage of the 911 Saves Act will be a win for public safety, and APCO is committed to doing everything it can to help make sure this happens. Thank you. And now I'm happy to turn things over to Charles Goodwin, the Vice President of the Massachusetts Communications Supervisor Association and Training Supervisor for Natick Communications.
Thank you, Director. So, as the Director said, I am the Training Supervisor for the Natick Police Department in Natick, Massachusetts. So I come from the field. I began as a overnight 911 communications officer and then slowly worked my way up in the field. So from Massachusetts and all of our telecommunicators, I want to begin by thanking the members of Congress that are here today who have graciously chosen to introduce this bill. As you've heard already, and as you'll probably hear in the coming weeks, you're going to hear a lot about why 911 call takers and dispatchers should be classified as members of public safety and protective services rather than as clerical workers. So I'd like to begin by telling you a personal story. In September of 2015, at about 6:45 a.m., I was coming to the close of my overnight shift. At that time, the 911 phone rang. Upon answering the phone, I heard the screams of a father exclaiming how his 6-month-old was not breathing. I jumped into action, dispatching police and fire responders to the scene. I gathered information, and I began to give CPR instructions. As I did everything I could to calm the father and provide those CPR instructions, the police arrived on scene. I continued to maintain contact with the father while police officers worked as they could and as hard as they could to try to save that 6-month-old's life. Fire service then arrived on scene. They loaded that child into an ambulance and they rushed off to the hospital. Unfortunately, the 6-month-old did not live. To this day, I will never forget this call, among many others that I've taken. Now imagine 911 call takers and dispatchers from your hometown. We deal with calls like this every day. To classify the work that we do as clerical is a disservice to the profession. We take emergency calls day in and day out for 8, 12, up to 16 hours a day. We listen to the screams of a father as he begs for his son's life back. The arguments between lovers as they fight with each other. And the cries of a child as she's scared and in need of help. We stay calm, we collect information, we direct first responders to the scene, and we ensure that the appropriate help is provided. We are not clerical workers. We are members of a public safety team. The 911 Center is the heartbeat of that team. We are the first contact many people make in an emergency. We are expected to stay calm, ask questions, and ensure the right first responders are sent to your emergency. We do this every day, no matter what is going on with our lives. We put the lives of our community first. I ask all other members of Congress today to please support the 911 Saves Act and place 911 call takers and dispatchers across the country in the classification they deserve as members of protective services. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to welcome Jeremy DeMar, who's the Executive Director of Springfield Emergency Communications and the Western Regional Vice President of Massachusetts Communications Supervisors Association, to speak. Thank you.
Sir. Good afternoon. I'd like to echo my colleagues' comments and offer thanks to our congressional folks here that have supported this bill. And I also have a story for you. It goes something like this. 911, the great unknown. Unlike their public safety counterparts, America's telecommunicators and dispatchers are hidden from view, operating behind the scenes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These unsung heroes answer our calls for help, provide detailed life-saving instructions, stay on the line with us during scary situations, and console us in our darkest hours. They truly are America's first responders. One of the most common questions 911 professionals hear from someone unfamiliar with the profession is, what's the craziest call you've ever had? The answer given is likely filtered or watered down just enough to pacify the asking party. Fortunately, the questions we don't hear as often are, what's the worst call you've ever taken? Or what's the most horrific situation you've ever had to deal with? Recently, I had the opportunity to chat with a close friend of mine, Police Chief Kristen Zeman, about an event that occurred in her jurisdiction, which absolutely fit this description. On February 15, 2019, a rapidly unfolding active shooter event began at Henry Prant Company in Aurora, Illinois, resulting in multiple fatalities and multiple officers shot. Chief Zeman couldn't say enough about the actions of her dispatchers and telecommunicators during the event, describing them as the glue that held things together. As is the case in many emergency communications centers throughout the country, the 911 professionals who worked this event knew many of the responding officers personally and worked with them on a regular basis. Sorry, the wind's catching me. Those unfamiliar with the profession can only imagine what the dispatcher must have been feeling when she heard one of the responding officers report the discovery of multiple deceased individuals, followed shortly thereafter by another officer saying, "I've been shot." A recent Twitter post from the chief acknowledged the ability of these professionals to maintain a calm and steady presence even when they are shaking inside. Dispatchers and telecommunicators walk through the door every day knowing that might be the day she or he has to deal with that once-in-a-career incident. This was undoubtedly the case for many of the 911 professionals in Aurora that day. The evolution of next generation 911 will introduce incident-related imagery in the form of still images, pre-recorded video, and streaming media to the Emergency Communications Center. While our profession has always been one of listening, for the first time, telecommunicators and dispatchers will now see and hear what is going on at an incident scene. Research suggests the addition of a visual aspect to this vital public safety role will increase instances of secondary stress, vicarious trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder among public safety communications personnel. The arrival of this technology is also expected to create issues with retention of existing personnel and recruitment of new personnel. Critical incident stress management will become increasingly important in the Emergency Communications Center of tomorrow. The 911 Saves Act is vital legislation for the 911 profession on so many levels. I'd like to thank all of our nation's representatives who are responsible for the development of this act and encourage those who haven't officially signed on to support this initiative to do so soon. Thank you. Our next presenter is Lindsay Washington, an EMT, AFSCME member, and local president of EMS Workers United in Washington, D.C.
Hi. Thank you all for having me, and thank you all. My name is Lindsay Washington. I'm an EMS professional and AFSCME member. I am here today to lend my support to Congresswoman Torres and her bill, 911 Saves Lives. As an EMS professional, I work as part of a team. My fellow EMTs and paramedics are only a crucial arm of a dedicated group of highly trained professionals. Excuse me. Dispatchers play an essential role in saving lives and helping me do my job safely. They are our eyes and ears before we arrive on the scene. They receive advanced training to effectively assess the situation, ask the right questions, and communicate vital information so that we know what to expect when we get on scene of an emergency. Without dispatchers, EMS professionals could not do their jobs. 911 dispatchers deserve the benefits and respect of a first responder classification. Next we have Jameson Peavyhouse, president of NENA, the 911 Association.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. As you said, I'm Jameson Peavyhouse, president of the National Emergency Number Association, who represents over the 100,000 telecommunicators in our nation today. We at NENA develop technical and operational standards for next generation 911 that every citizen can use to ensure the access to life-saving power of 911 throughout our country. This commitment includes support, both in training and giving tools to telecommunicators on the front line. But we also advocate for our 911 professionals in the industry so that every American can understand that 911, the job behind that is difficult, stressful, and as you highlighted, very specialized. In today's world of ever-evolving threats and emergencies, the 911 telecommunicator serves as the central nervous system for emergency response. Through triaging of patients, situational intelligence of ongoing incidents, and the safety of the citizen in harm's way, all of that begins with a 911 telecommunicator. They are there for every call, every crisis, with an unwavering commitment to every citizen. So I'm deeply honored to stand here today with my fellow telecommunicator, Congresswoman Torres, as she champions the 911 Saves Act to properly classify the nation's first responders as a protected service occupation. So thank you to Representative Torres, Kana, Fitzpatrick, and Shalala for their leadership in this initiative. And thank you to Commissioner Worson for her continued dedication to 911 and its success, and to my esteemed colleagues in public safety. But most importantly, thank you to all of our 911 telecommunicators who are out serving right now on the nation's front lines of emergency services. So I'll turn this back over to the Congresswoman.
Yes, thank you. You've heard from all of these folks that care very much and know so much about the industry. I'd like to now open it up for any questions from any of you, should there be any. The reclassification of 911 dispatchers, what it would mean, access to training dollars that they currently don't have. We want to make sure that while they are under deployed, there isn't enough personnel currently answering 911 calls, and the attrition rate is incredibly high because of lack of training. To professionalize this profession has been one of my goals, and this is the first step to getting them the resources that they need. Most of 911 dispatchers belong to some type of labor organization, and that would be something that they would have to negotiate. It's a bipartisan bill. We have a lot of support, and I think it's really important that for members and for the general public to understand that we are not simply talking, about someone who sits at a switchboard transferring calls from one desk to another. As you heard some of the examples of the types of calls that these professionals are taking, it requires a lot of training, and for that reason, I think that the respect for the position is there, and they should be reclassified. Anyone else want to echo any of that? Okay. Great. Thank you all for coming.